It is good to see you this evening. I'm glad you came out. We've got almost a full house with us tonight. I didn't know they were making DVDs of this thing, or I wouldn't have worn a sweater that looks like a test pattern. Gonna have a hard time moving them from tonight's lesson, I'll tell you that. I'll try to show up in something a bit more blah. You see, the problem is, the rest of me is already so blah that I thought if I wore something blah, I'd disappear. And this is kind of a matter-antimatter thing, but we'll talk later. It's good to have you here. We want to talk, this is very simple stuff. What do we do here? They're rushing the podium already. Gonna have a little, I didn't know if they didn't like me or if there's going to be a little mosh pit up here. I was just a little concerned. If you don't know what that is, ask somebody up here. I like to be able to teach subjects like this in a way that you can take it and teach it. It doesn't do anybody any good to wow you with science. Every profession has its own language. If you're a farmer, you've got terms you use. You've got your own little language. You've got your own little culture going there. If you're an engineer, the same. Scientists are the same. And sometimes you use that culture purposefully to keep other people out. You use this big language to wow the group. That won't do us any good tonight. I really want us to be able to leave here tonight and say, I got it, and I can show this to somebody else. We're going to talk tonight about evolution's fatal flaw. And if you weren't here yesterday, just in case you weren't, we really need to say this again. When I say evolution, we're talking about macroevolution. Macroevolution is what most of us think of when we hear the word evolution. And that is the idea that man, for example, came from something else, from some other non-human animal. And that in fact, horses came from a non-horse. And we all came from an amoeba somewhere, one little one-celled animal. That's macroevolution. Microevolution, not only do I believe in it, I've seen it. So have you. You cross two kinds of dogs and get a third. You have people that, for example, my wife is tall and pretty. Our kids are halfway decent. You see that? That's microevolution at work. It's very provable, and there's not a problem. However, no matter how much you try, you can't breed a dog into becoming a non-dog or cow into becoming a non-cow. There are limits there. Therefore, I do not believe in macroevolution. The evidence is in, and there isn't any for it. But rather than just say that, let me give you a couple of tools that you can use tonight, an overall philosophy, and then having a look at Scripture so that you can have a place to start whenever you show people this. Back in the old days of flying, back in the early airlines, there was no door between you and the pilots. You could see them. And in fact, your plane did not set level. It set a little bit pointed up because the propellers couldn't get you going as fast as the jets can today. So you need a little bit of help with that angle to get up off the ground. Well, some of the early airline pilots, just to have fun with their passengers, would get a bag and put some loose nuts and bolts in it and set it beside them. Whenever they lifted off the runway, the bag would tip and those bolts would run back through the cabin. Now, you might think this is a horrible thing, but those of you who are out here thinking, that sounds cool, you're my people. I love you. As they would, when was the last time you've ever been on an airplane that there was a problem? If you've ever been on one, you never heard a pilot say, for example, we lost our outboard engine, no problem, we've got spares. You've never heard him say, all right, we lost a bit of a wing, weren't using it much anyway. How much do you really need to turn left? And so you never hear this. Airplanes are made out of just over if we're talking about 727, just over 2 million non-flying parts. Not one of those 2 million parts flies. You got to put them together, or you don't have something flying. You don't have spare stuff. It's not like you can hear a few bolts popping off, and a guy going, got over 1.9 million left, no problem. No, you don't, because we need them all. It's rather like a pie. A pie's not made out of very many ingredients, but none of them taste good on their own. Well, within reason. You know, you can eat an apple, yeah. You can put a spoonful of sugar in your mouth, fair enough. But if you make a pie and you leave out one ingredient, it's not quite a pie, is it? My mom's done this frequently. We've had several non-pies in my life. We need the entire ingredients going here. When we look at the world, what we see is a functioning entity. Things work. Trees grow. Birds fly. Squirrels do what squirrels do. And fish swim. And they all seem to know what to do. And in fact, it is built into us in a bit of programming we call DNA. And also an RNA, but everybody knows DNA, so let's go there. If we, by the way, don't let anybody in the newspapers or in politics fool you on this. I've heard so much rubbish about stem cells that it's about driving me nuts. I have a program that I do on stem cells. We don't have time to do it here. I'm going to leave it with Jim. And it's PowerPoint and notes. And so he's going to be so smart on this. He's going to tear to. We're going to give him an honorary degree from Rochester College. We're going to do something there. Well, it's another one. You know, we're going to give him more degrees. Friends, we haven't mapped our DNA yet. There was a Rose Garden ceremony with President Clinton 5-6 years ago now, signing a proclamation that we had mapped the human genome. You kidding? We haven't even found it. Are you aware we're not even sure how many genes you've got? And that the argument is about a 50% differential. It's not like we're saying it's either 4 or 5. We're talking about, you know, one group says 30,000, another group says over 70,000. That's a bit of a gap. But if the DNA that we do know, if we did encode it, would take over 2,000 volumes, encyclopedia-sized volumes, just to put the code down and not even translate it. And that's even in a blade of grass and in a mosquito. But the mosquito never accidentally turns into grass. That would be kind of cool, but it doesn't. Everything works. And so to start with one aspect of this, let's just talk about one thing. Job. Job was having a terrible time of it. I keep moving, and I know it's going to drive the guy with the camera crazy. But I don't even, like I said, I get this big platform. I got to run around the place, you know. So there's an invisible fence. I have to wear a collar. But still, I'm able to get most places. I wasn't in the notes. Anyway, Job had the worst day of anybody, the worst life of anybody. No question about it. He lost his, not lost as in just misplaced. I mean, they were dead. His children, his reputation, his riches, his flocks, his herds, everything gone. All he had left was his wife. He was sitting there in a pile of ashes, scraping at his sores with a bit of a pot that had broken. And she's just looking at him saying, "Curse God and die." No wonder he loved her. Everything was wrong. Whenever Job complained, and as soon as I say Job, if you think patience, you've been brainwashed. Read the book. His patience lasts about 3 chapters. And then patience is gone. And he says things to God that we're not allowed to say. That's what you've been told. I was told all my life, you never bargain with God. Then I read the story of Abraham. I'm going, wait a minute. God didn't kill him. Look, it's in the Bible. And Job was just always angry at God. Whenever he puts all this accusation upon God, and God comes and says, "All right, Job, I'll explain it all to you. Here's a duck." Now, you might think I'm making this up, but I'm not. There are no answers given to Job. He's given a tour. He's given a tour of the cosmos, which we're not going to do tonight. Then of the animal kingdom, which we're going to do tonight. And then a bit of the animal kingdom we're going to do tomorrow night. But here he says, look at the animals. And I can imagine Job going, what? Why am I looking at birds? Why are you pointing at a burrow, for example? What's going on here? God was trying to show him, there's this whole complete story going on here, Job. You're not seeing most of it. One of the aspects of that story, and I'd love to go, because I'm fighting it, because Job's my favorite story. And I could go there and not leave for the next 6 months, but we got to leap from here to talk about the way God approached him with one very simple fact. Everything eats. And that is evolution's fatal flaw. We can find others, but let's start there. I can remember being in London, and the professor drew an amoeba. on the board. Easy done. Just make sure the lines meet. You got one. There's no predetermined shape for an amoeba. Not a lot of personality, evidently. So they just draw one. And the professor goes, the first animal was a single-celled amoeba. I'm sorry, but they'd sound like this. And a single-celled amoeba-like creature. And my hand went up, and I said, what did it eat? The room got very quiet, because we have a problem. You see, amoebas only eat things that are alive or used to be alive. If it's the first thing alive, what did it eat? Unless we've got the dreaded rock-eating amoeba, we have got a problem. You know, the amoeba that ate Pittsburgh, we've got a real problem. And he started saying, well, that is, we've not answered that question yet. And I said, but we based the entire theory upon this. And an unanswered question, a hypothesis. Where are we going with this? Don't tell me it divided, then one bit ate the other. Because it doesn't divide as fast as it needs to eat. That would only work once. It would divide, eat the other one, and then starve to death before it could divide again. And he said, well, it's possible they used to divide faster. I said, wait a minute. Part of evolution's little story is that everything goes at natural rates, like geology. And that nothing ever started fast and then went slower. We got dismissed again. That happened a lot, actually. Everything eats. We got a little interesting world here. The world's an interesting collection of things that don't work. But it does work because it's all together. If it's all removed, it doesn't work. God goes to Job, chapter 38, he starts this. At the very end of 38, verse 39, he starts the animal kingdom. He's done the cosmos by then. We're going to look at it in just a bit. Before we do, let me try to explain what I mean by this. Let me tell you my woodpecker story. Learn this story, because there's no reason why I should be the only one with this in my head. Let's say that we're going to spot the evolutionist. We're going to give them a head start. We're going to give them a functioning planet with trees, bugs, and birds. That's a pretty good head start. Now, a bird decides it wants to become a woodpecker. Now, we're even spotting them a sentient bird, all right? So you're letting him have a thoughtful bird with aspirations, all right? So he wants to be a woodpecker. So we're not even asking about how he knows there are bugs under the bark. Let's just assume he's a psychic bird as well. So he flies to the tree trunk, he lands on a tree trunk and falls off. Because woodpeckers have an extra spur that allows them to stand on the side of things. Other birds do not have this spur. He's got a problem. So he goes, bummer, and he flies around thinking spur-growing thoughts for a minimum of 37,000 years. Now that's if every mutation goes absolutely perfectly, which, I'll give you a head start on this. Do you know the number of genetic mutations that we have been able to count? And we've been able to count them. The number of genetic mutations in every species which is beneficial. The answer is none. We have yet to find one. If a deer developed glow in the darkness, that's not good. It's hard to think of. Now, I had one teacher say, "Now wait, rabbits develop these big legs to get away from foxes." I said, "Oh, please. First of all, you don't have time. Foxes are chasing you. You're thinking here 50, 60,000 years minimum. That's a long run. Plus, the foxes could be developing bigger back legs." He'd said, "Never thought of that." I said, "I can tell." That's why it took me 12 years to get through my 8 years of college. But I crammed it all in there somehow. Well, the woodpecker, 37,000 years later, is a very hungry bird. So he lands on the side of a tree, and he stays there. He's got a spur now, very proud. Family's quite proud of him. He draws back, he goes, and he dies. He has just driven his beak through his brain. You see, woodpeckers have a little shock absorber built in. It's the way they're able to do this. Other birds don't have it. In fact, I will not explain how I know this, but if you catch a woodpecker and hold his head, you can move his beak around. When, hey, you have your hobbies, I have. When you let loose of him, I would recommend you point him. Well, we're going to give this woodpecker a family, and they're going, dude. And they're very upset about this, but they fly around for another at least 55,000 years to think of growing shock absorber thoughts. So they've not eaten now in almost 100,000 years, if you're doing the math. But so they're a little bit peckish, as we'd say. They're a little hungry. So finally, they land on the side of the tree. They can stay there. They got the spur. They go back and doesn't kill them. Got the shock absorber. And they see a bug and can't get it. You see, birds have this little short, clubby tongue. It's a very unimpressive tongue, except for woodpeckers. Woodpeckers have long tongues. In fact, a couple of species have tongues that are so long they can't store them in their mouth. They run them up their nose. You thought your job was bad. Tomorrow you come in, they'll say, how was school, kids? You can say, I'm not a woodpecker. I'm going to look on the positive side of things. Well, they have a long, sticky tongue. Other birds don't have long, sticky tongues. You see our problem here? You can't get there from here. You can't take what we've got and then make it something else. You can't make a bird half a woodpecker. Because if you do, it loses the ability to eat what the other birds do. In other words, woodpeckers can eat. Parrots can eat. But something which is halfway between a parrot and a woodpecker cannot. There's no food source for a sticky tongue thing that has to eat up like this, that we don't have it. You have to be one or the other. Everything eats. What about squirrels? You were probably told when you were a little kid in grade school, in the fall, the squirrels go off into the forest and they collect nuts. And then they go and they stuff them in the trees. And during the winter, they eat the nuts to survive. That is so almost true. Almost, but not quite. They do go off and they do gather nuts and they bury some and they stuff some under logs and they stuff stuff into trees and they promptly forget where they put them. Squirrels are very good at figuring out puzzles. They're brilliant at this, but they are really bad at long-term memory. They just happen upon certain, nuts under there. And they'll eat them. Have no idea how they got there, but they're quite pleased. In fact, if you separate a squirrel from its babies and give it a cold, there's a way you can do this with sprays. It numbs and they can't smell the kids. And then after an hour or so, bring them back. They don't know. It's like, who are these things? Get them away from me. They don't recognize them. Their memory's poor. I want to ask you a question. By the way, did you know there's a squirrel tree balance in this planet? If squirrels found the nuts that they buried, we wouldn't have very many trees. But we'd be up to here in squirrels. If they found too little nuts, we would eventually run out of squirrels and have too many trees. There's a squirrel nut balance. Question. Evolution says whenever something, there's these beneficial mutations that allow it to better survive, what aspect of this allows a squirrel to better survive? Did the long-term memory squirrels have a difficult time with this? I don't think so. There's no possible way. This either had to have occurred day one. Well, which evolved first? The tree or the squirrel? Yeah, only have a couple of weeks here. You either decide that God created the world, one miracle, or you have to believe in trillions of coincidences, none of which have ever been observed. You will believe in miracles, either one or trillion. It's up to you. People ask me why I would believe in creation. I always say it's much simpler to believe in one miracle than trillions. That's the only way to look at it. Friends, there are others. What about Barracuda? You know, Barracuda are nasty things. Everything is afraid of a Barracuda, except there's this little fish. It's about that long. Those of you getting the audio tape, it's about that long. See, should have been here, shouldn't you? These little things swim around under the water, and every so often they just stop and start swimming in a big circle, just a few feet off the seabed. Now, we have never been able to find the signal. What starts this, but also the signal that they send out, because all of a sudden, other fish leave, and barracuda start showing up. But instead of being afraid of the barracuda, the little fish keep swimming around in this circle. And the barracuda come in, they line up. You will see them disappearing off beyond what a camera can photograph, staying one after another, politely waiting their turn. And one after another will swim in, open its mouth, and the little fish will go and eat the bad stuff off of the barracuda teeth. The dentist fish, that's their name, only eat stuff off of barracuda teeth. If barracuda don't get to the dentist fish, they lose their teeth quicker than they can replace them, therefore becoming less of a terror of the sea and more a comic of the sea, because they're trying to gum stuff to death, and that does not work. They will be extinct without the dentist fish. So the question then begs itself, doesn't it? Which evolved first? Because you've only got a couple of weeks to get them both in, and both of them knowing their jobs, and both of them understanding the signals to give and receive. Either somebody hardwired this, or it just happened. Friends, I don't believe in evolution because it requires way too much faith. Believing in God, I got so much evidence, it's almost not walking by faith sometimes. He's laid so much evidence in front of us. But you want to believe in evolution? You got nothing. You got barracudas, squirrels, and woodpeckers. What about rattlesnakes? Don't like them. The Bible, do not come up to me later and talk to me about how wonderful snakes are. I always get one or two weird people doing this. They don't talk to me about their pet snake, and it's not poisonous, it can't hurt you. Excuse me. Anything that can give you a heart attack can hurt you. Rattlesnakes have notoriously poor eyesight. Now, who would have thought of it? How does this help a rattlesnake? But it does have heat sensors built in. It has infrared in a different sense. Not seen through the eyes, but felt in the brain and interpreted. It can hunt as well at night as it can in the day, because it sees as well at night as it does in the day. Feel free to go to your car joyfully. I think most of them are getting a little slow about this time if you have them here. But the point being, who developed infrared? Why didn't they just develop eyes instead? It's all done. It all works. What about turtles? What about, for example, there's snapping turtle, the alligator snapping turtle. You ever seen one of them? Nasty things. Huge. Looks like a tank. Looks like a Bradley tank walking across the road. We got a few that people decided would be nice to put in ponds around us. And every so often they leave the area and terrorize the slower children. But it's... which evidently we have, because there's a sign that says slow children right in front of our... When an alligator snapping turtle wants to eat, it just opens its mouth and flicks its tongue out, because its tongue has a lure on the end that looks like a worm. How did it eat before it did that? The answer is it couldn't have. So what time do you have for evolution here? Really between lunch and dinner. That's all you got. The Bible starts it right there in Job 38, starting at verse 39. Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lurk in the lairs to lie in wait? Who provides food for the raven when its young cry to God and wander about for lack of food? I did not really understand verse 41 until my son got me into something. We take care of parrots. We have 5. But we also go help parrots that have been abandoned or abused or the like. And they're very highly intelligent little guys. And therefore they can get mentally ill when they're damaged. And there are very few people that really work with them. And he got me into this a few years ago. And we'll take them in and we'll foster parent a bird and get it back to life. Get it going. Get it to be a happy bird again. Sometimes it takes a while. Well, something about these birds has humbled me. Parrots are hardwired by God. You cannot stop this. The first hour of every day, they will sing with absolute abandon. Joy. Absolute joy. And 1 hour before going to bed at night, absolute joy. One of ours thinks it's a dog, so we call him Scooby. Will actually be quiet and playing quietly, not making a noise for hours and hours and hours. And then as the sun gets right down into the right position, he'll start throwing his wings and dancing and laughing and singing to someone we don't see. The Bible says, these little birds are crying out to me. Do you remember what Jesus said? He told his apostles, God won't let a bird die alone. A sparrow will not fall to earth without the Father. I always find it interesting the way God talks about birds. Psalm 50, for example, he says, I own the cattle. I possess this, that, and the other. But when he comes to the birds, he says, I know them. Interesting, isn't it? He says, these little birds are crying out to me for their food. Who provided it? Evolution? Chance? The blind wheel of DNA? No. God made sure. You know why you have rainforest? Parrots. Sorry, you can't have a rainforest without parrots because they keep it growing. Not only does their droppings fertilize and make a very rich environment, they're designed by God to eat only one bite of something that they really, really like. Sometimes 2 bites, and then throw it. And they'll throw it. We have little splash areas. They'll throw it because that goes down to the floor and grows the next plant stuff for the next generations. You don't have parrots, you don't have a jungle. Which evolved first? Interesting question, isn't it? You don't see cows taking 1 bite of grass and then spitting 1 bite so that there'll be grass for later. No, don't need to. God has everything figured out. What did it eat? And here's the kicker. When they say, well, we're not really sure, but it would have had something, obviously. All right, if it had something to eat, why did it change? If you can live and eat, there's no need to evolve. If you evolve, you will evolve out of your food. This is a problem. And evolutionists refuse to answer the question because, you see, if they ate something which doesn't exist now, we should have its bones, and we don't. It should show up somewhere in a fossil record. It doesn't. God had everything designed. What did it eat? Well, look at pregnancy, verses 1 through 4 of chapter 39. God here says that he counts the days. He knows the months. He knows when the deer in the woods is going to give birth. Isn't it interesting? We serve a God that attends the birth of a deer in the forest. Our God is not this mean, stomping God. I don't know where people get this. Our God wants us to go to heaven so badly, he would let his own son die for us to get us there. Friends, I want you to go to heaven too, but you can't touch my boy. He loves you more than me. He loves these animals too. Now, don't feel bad. I'm not saying you can't eat them. He said you could. But he also told you to take care of them too. You were never allowed. Do you know the first humane laws about animals were in the Bible? Predated any other laws about treating animals by thousands of years. To the point where when Jesus was alive, he made sure they understood when an ox is treading out the corn, that people were putting a muzzle on him. He says, you're not allowed to muzzle him. He's doing work in that corn. He's allowed to bite and eat the corn too. You cannot keep it from him. It's his right. What about God? Have you ever thought of God this way? You need to. You need to. God's the one who designed the parrots to dance and scream and enjoy their life. Now, see, I don't enjoy mornings. I'm not a morning person. I'm not an evening person either. But, I get up on the morning. I have never in my life said, this is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice. Never. I always open my eyes and go, oh, dear, it's another day. All right, fair enough. And I'll roll out of bed, stand up. My first word is usually, ow. Because at 47, I can just try to get out of bed and fail to nail the dismount. And then to hear these little birds laughing and having a great time humbles me a bit. Who put it there? God did. Don't ever get this view of God as this distant, angry warrior. My God, this may offend a few here, but fair enough. All right? My God did it, not me. My God taught honeybees how to dance. My God lifted up baboons' rear ends and painted rainbows. My God designed a giraffe that has exactly the same number of neck bones that you've got. But just wanted to show you what he could do with it. And if you don't like that, you don't understand folk like me who can. People are always concerned. They'll say, no, how are you spending your days? First of all, I'm not a people person. I wish I was. But it's just too much work for me to be sane long enough around an individual. And so what do? I do my writing, I do my reading. But when I'm not, I go walking and look at what God made. Looked at the leaves today. And I see a lot of things maybe you don't see. But one of the things is, when I see a big tree up and it's got these pretty colors in it, one of my first thoughts is, that's my dad did that. That was my father. No matter how you treat me today, watch out. My dad will get you. Look what he can do to a tree. It's kind of cool once you look at this. Well, then by the way, pregnancy. Is pregnancy a design flaw? I had a debate with a fellow once, and by the way, I found out somebody else had done this as well when I read an earlier debate with Tom Warren and Anthony Flew of Oxford University. This fellow said pregnancy had to just develop by accident because there's no way this is good for you. There's got to be a better way. He actually said like a zipper to get the baby out. And I said, all right, I've not been a woman for years, but let me just pass on information I've been handed, right? When a woman is first pregnant, she will very frequently run out and buy a bunch of maternity stuff when she still looks like a straw. She's very proud. And then she will glow and a while she even believes the glowing bit. The husband always thinks she's glowing, but she quits believing him after a few months. And she's walking around. The last few weeks of pregnancy, God dumps a hormone into her system. Now, this hormone has a name that's this long. We're going to call it the get this baby out of me hormone. She might have been enjoying her pregnancy until that time. But when that hormone hits, it is get it out. And it is a very difficult time for her, and she is ready to get this baby out of her. And then she goes through, I can remember when my children were born, the little Scottish ladies all around were saying, oh, Patrick, you got to be in there. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. They lied through their teeth. There was screaming and sweating and cursing, and she was doing some of that too. And then they hand you this little wrinkled up purple thing, and they say, it looks like you. And I'm going, I'm looking at you, where do you blow it up? Come on, it's not inflated. But you know what, ladies, every lady in here who's given birth will tell you something. If that baby had just shown up in an egg that you nurtured for a few months and then it hatched, you wouldn't care much for the child like you do when you've born that thing. My mama, I've noticed that the older I get, the longer it took for me to be born. Labor has stretched. If I don't call her for a week or two, it's all right, only 3 days of labor. I'm saying, Mom, I can remember when it was 3 hours. It's stretching a bit. I'm your mother. All right, fair enough, 3 days. Friends, God designed it so we would protect our new babies. This is why dads will come in and they won't let us hold the baby because we hold it wrong. We don't do things right. Because we'll grab it, by the heel and say, does this thing need changed? Mama won't let us do that. This is why even children know that when they're sick, don't go to dad. He'll just give you medicine. Go to mama. She'll rock you, love on you. Why? She has more invested. Dad's thinking, I know where you came from. I can get another one. But I'll ask you a question. And it's the same everything eats thing. How can you halfway develop the system of pregnancy and delivery we've got now? It's impossible. It's either the full package or you lay an egg. There's nowhere in between. Friends, you can't get from an amoeba to this. You got to start with this. No wonder God says he made things male and female. He already sorted it out. You can't develop it. Right now, by the way, that's one of the biggest fights in science, is trying to figure out how things became male and female. And it is hilarious for me to sit in these meetings. I can't write stuff this funny. Oh, anyway, what about chapter 39, verse 4? Their young ones are healthy. They grow strong with grain. They depart and do not return to them. Instinct. Who taught the bees how to dance? Who taught the whales that when they give birth, the mama whale will lift her baby up above the water to breathe and lower it and lift it until the baby learns? Evolutionists will tell you that's just random behavior, that only the whales that did that survived. Well, that's rubbish, because random behavior does not pass on genetically. Neither does learned behavior, acquired behavior. I speak several languages. When my children were born, they spoke nothing. It doesn't come genetically. It's the same with behavior. Either you are hardwired to put when your baby was born, did you go and stick it in the bathtub? No. But they will stick their babies up where they do not live, knowing they've got to learn to breathe there. Bring them down. And in some species of whales, this takes days. But the mama stays with it, because the mama gave birth. Instinct. You either have it or you don't. If your instincts are halfway bad, you don't survive. If a bee knows how to go out and find the honey or the pollen, but doesn't know how to get home, it's no use. You see what I mean? 2 million non-flying parts. You've got to have them all together. Well, how about migration? Yeah, ducks. How about going, you can take a bird, you can hatch it, never let it see its mom and dad. You can hatch it just in its own little nursery, a little warming bin there, incubator. And after a while, let it loose, and guess what? It'll fly all the way to the other end of the world on the right day to join the rest of them. That's not learned behavior. How was that hardwired? How did it evolve? The answer is it can't evolve. It has to have been there. We can keep looking here. In fact, there's who set the wild donkey free. God gets very sarcastic, by the way. If you don't believe in humor in church, you have a word with God, because he started it. Very sarcastic, starting in verse 9. Some of them will say wild ox. It's probably an auroch, which is like a Cape buffalo. Cape buffalo is probably the meanest tempered mammal. And an auroch is a Cape buffalo style of creature that lives in swamps. And it's probably extinct now. But we can only say probably, because during the Vietnam War, some soldiers described an animal several times that was an auroch. So whether they're still out in the swamps or not, nobody knows. You don't want to find one. And here he's saying, you're gonna play around with them? Can you make a deal with one? Can you make it go fetch things for you? He gets very sarcastic with him, saying, Job, you seem to know how to run the universe. Can you even direct an ox? The answer is no. So God's saying, you better be quiet then. And don't tell God how to run it. And then I love the bit about the ostrich, 13, verse 13. The wings of the ostrich wave proudly. In fact, the literal word is they flap joyfully. I had a scientist once tell me, he said, now an ostrich is an example of an animal in transition. It's either becoming a bird or it's becoming a non-bird. I said, how do you know? And he says, because it has wings but doesn't fly. I said, so birds have to be able to fly? And he goes, well, yes. And I said, no. What about a penguin? Penguins don't fly. You call them birds. They fly underwater. And he said, well, yeah, but they still fly. And I said, and ostriches do too. He says, what? I said, when they run. You see, the wings of an ostrich do several things. One, they do stick their head down when they see danger. They don't put their head under the ground. They don't bury their head. They just put it down and they fluff up their feathers. Because to a lion, now they look like a bush. Lions have very poor vision. As long as they're not moving, the lion or cheetah is not going to see them. It's just going to see other bushes out there. The feathers are pretty important then. Bald ostriches don't survive. Although I've never seen one, well, they wouldn't survive. There you go. Also, they do something else. They tremble those wings when the temperature gets to a certain level. and they create an airflow pattern around them to cool their blood so they do not overheat and stroke. They use the feathers to do this. But they also, when they run, they fly on the ground. For as they run, they'll stretch their wings out. And by the way, they will call and laugh as they're running. And whenever they turn, they will tilt the wings, just like the wings of an airplane, to direct them around the curve, to lift them up, to keep their feet on the ground as they're going down a slope. They adjust the wings, just like on an F1 car or perhaps an Indy car, that rear spoiler moves. I don't know if they do on NASCAR or not. I don't watch that. To me, it's just men turning left. I can't help but look at it and think, guys, if you'd left 10 minutes earlier, you wouldn't have to rush like this. But that's just me. Do not come up to me and explain it later either. Because I always get that. Now, what you got to understand. If ignorance is bliss, I'm a happy guy. Leave it alone. But the ostrich uses its wing. It flies. But then he talks about the stork. And he goes, but it doesn't compare with the wings of a stork. Beautiful. And then he gets guilty of very understatement here. He goes, I did not give her, he says, a great deal of wisdom. A stork makes a squirrel look like Einstein. A stork can literally lay an egg and not know it dead. It is amazing. And as he says here, it'll step on its own children, not being aware they're there. And he says, you can look at that stork all you want to, Job, and say, what a stupid bird, what a stupid bird. But when it spreads its wings and flies, it laughs at you. Do you know we still don't know how birds fly? But don't get me wrong. We got the cameras. We do the math. But we cannot design a machine to do it. Every time we design a machine to move like their wings move, it shakes apart. Or it burns up all of its fuel before it gets off the ground. But a bird can fly. And there are birds that even sleep and eat in the air and do not land for years at a time. I was flying back from Scotland once. The pilot came on, and he said, I was flying. I was in a plane with other people, so I don't have my own plane or anything, So flying back from Scotland once, and the pilot came on and he goes, we're going to be landing here in about 30 minutes in Montreal. I'm going, Montreal? We're not supposed to land in Montreal. We're supposed to go on to Chicago. What's this? I was getting all kind of huffed up about it. And he says, we've been facing an unexpected headwind and we're low on fuel. I'm thinking, bienvenue à Canada. I'm so happy, to be in Montreal. Snails for everyone, anyway, just kissing everybody on the cheeks, having a great time. Birds don't run into that problem. They can just keep going. We still don't know how, but the birds are still laughing at us. Then he goes on. He talks, by the way, if you don't know this, birds are designed. Have you ever had a bird, even a parakeet? All right? And I'm sorry you don't say this often in church, but you know that they poop a lot. The reason is, in fact, it's about every 20 to 27 minutes, according to which species of the hookbills. And parakeets are parrots. I don't know if you knew that, but they are. Why is it so? Because they have to stay light to fly. In fact, every bone they've got is hollow. And their feathers, every individual strand is hollow. They are built to be light. They eat a little, poop a little, eat a little, poop. That's their life. Sounds good. You can't get halfway there. You can't get the eat a little equation, but not the poop and still fly. You got to have everything, or you have a non-bird. Well, interesting, isn't it? He'll go down further here and talk about the hawk. The hawk can do algebra, trigonometry, and calculus in its head. You want to land on an aircraft carrier? I've only done it on a simulator a couple of times, and I never successfully did it. I was at the Naval Air Station in Norfolk, Virginia. They took me up into that it's a building bigger than this. What other science would get away with it? like engineers at NASA, throw a switch, the rocket doesn't go. And say, well, it's not our fault, the rocket's in denial. It's resistant, that's what it is. Yeah. Codependent switch makers. Anyway, so friends, I can't do it, but a hawk can be a mile in the sky and see a mouse scampering across the desert floor. Adjust height, speed, direction, trajectory, perfectly. Get down right before it gets to the mouse. It'll throw its wings up, cup them, and stall. And drop, grab it, and then before it hits the ground, is able to move those wings back around, throw a cushion of air like a helicopter, get up high enough then to take a full swoop, and get back up into bird mode. We can't do this. We have Harrier jump jets crashing all the time. Ospreys, we tried to make an osprey, is what it's called, an airplane. You've seen it? Moves up like this. We keep losing them. A hawk can do it, but there's something else about a hawk. You know, you can't be half a hawk. You got to have the whole thing. Because when a hawk does that stall, he undergoes many, many G's. His bones aren't hollow. He has arches in them, like you see on the side of the Cathedral Notre Dame in Paris, those flying buttresses, right? Well, friends, he's got little things in his bones. Because if he didn't, when he went into that stall mode, you'd hear this little snap, 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 and boneless chicken. You'd have a mouse giggling, kicking sand at him, you know. All right, so how did something become kind of a hawk? And what did it eat? The answer is you've either got a hawk or you don't. A kind of a hawk doesn't eat. Well, we don't even have time to look at the rest of this. I just now looked up at the clock. I know it's a school night, sorry. Sometimes, he talks about horses. I don't know much about horses. My wife was raised in Denver, right on the edge of the Rockies. On our first date, we rode horses and rode horses and rode horses until we ran out of quarters. But then, the fun thing is you think I'm kidding. It's been an adventure for her. She's going to write a book as soon as I'm dead, and she's ready. I don't know much about horses, but I will tell you this, and I can say this with absolute certainty. God loves them. Because he uses verbs, adverbs, and adjectives in this same chapter, 39, talking about horses that he never uses about any other animal. And so when I say I don't know much about horses, I'm not trying to say they're not important. God loves them. And I hear people, you've seen that little chart, haven't you, with that little tiny horsey thing? The Ophius, all the way up to the full-grown horse. And that's the evolution of the horse. Excuse me. I come from Scotland. An Irish mother, mind you, but Scotland. Scotland's a little place. It's a little bit more than half the size in Indiana. All right? But in Scotland, we have the Shetland horses. Not Shetland ponies. These are real horses whose heads are about 2 feet above the ground. Full-grown horses. But in Scotland, we've also got the Clydesdales. Not exactly the biggest horses in the world. I do believe the Welsh Percheron beats it, but I'm not sure. But in just a few miles, you'll go from the Shetland horses to the Clydesdales. Which one of those is a non-horse? The answer is they're both horses. Guess what they eat? Both of them eat the same thing. Friends, God designed everything, and he designed you. Now, you may not look like the world says you're supposed to look, but quite frankly, God's never really cared much about what the world said. He has a design, and he loves variety, and just look at you in all your glory. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's where you're supposed to be. And then whenever he made you, according to Psalm 139, read it tonight. Psalm 139, he wove you together before you were born. He designed you. He placed you. He wrote a book about you before you were born. It's in the Bible. Read it, Psalm 139. Which leads me to this. God designed this whole universe just right. He designed you just right. Do you think you being here tonight is an accident? Do you think that's just a just so story? Or are you here tonight because you're going to have a chance to be a Christian tonight? You're going to have a chance to get to know the one who made you tonight. We're about to sing a song. Churches of Christ do that at the end of every lesson. They sing a song. We stand up. And if you want to be a Christian, then you would come forward and you would let this fellow know right here. You let the minister here know. You say, Jim, I want to be a Christian. And he'll tell you how. It's going to involve your belief, repenting of your sins. It's going to involve you saying that you believe Jesus is the Christ. And it's going to involve baptism. God designed it just right. Can't leave any of that out. It's a set. If you're ready, let Jim know tonight as we stand and sing.